Welcome to the Grow Renaissance podcast. Let's nourish the world.
All right, welcome back to Pasture Prime Time, where soil meets soul and cattle calls the shots. Today's guest is a rancher, thinker, renegade of the range, Hobbs Magaret. Hobbs isn't just herding cattle, he's herding ideas. As a co-founder of Grass Nomads, correct me if I'm wrong on that, and the voice behind some of the most unvarnished truths in regenerative ranching, Hobbs is here to challenge the orthodoxies of both conventional agriculture and eco-gentified greenwashing. His recent book, Herd, if you haven't got it, make sure you go grab it, and we'll have a link on our podcast at the bottom here to grab that book. The Animals That Gave Rise to Humanity and Why We Need Them More Than Ever. This isn't just a love letter to livestock. It really is a manifesto for reclaiming our relationship with animals, land, and each other. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about bovine intelligence, soil insurance, cowboy data, and how this all comes together. So, Hobbs, it's a pleasure to have you on the podcast. I know we've been trying to connect our schedules, and at long last we have. Really looking forward to our conversation. And I'd love for you to dive in and maybe fill in the gaps on your journey to where you've ended up today, and maybe a little bit why you decided to write this book.
Sure. First thing I do want to mention is that I have no recollection of ever co-founding the Grass Nomads thing. So
Okay.
I'm not saying I didn't. I just have no recollection of it.
Well, redact that then. I apologize. I thought I grabbed that information. So I'm giving
that's
you
fantastic.
I'm giving you credit for things that maybe it's a future state thing that you need to put together. Grass Nomads.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you went into some sort of future seer type mode, and you saw something that was that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, you basically you hit heavily on the book. I grew up in and around the conventional cattle world in the Panhandle of Texas, and although not so deeply married to it that I came away with any intensely preconceived notions. Then I went and worked as a composer and various other things for my 20s, and then when I had a family and kids, started going back to my roots and started grazing almost 8 years ago now. Started grazing with like 11 cows and found the most conspicuous locations that I could in Sisters, Oregon, and everything sort of started snowballing there. We did that for several years and then moved down to Texas, where I thought I could just plug and play the same things, and I learned very quickly that I absolutely could not. But I'm very grateful to have done a year of grazing here 3 years of grazing in Deep East Texas, because the vast majority of beef cattle across the entire planet are in subtropical and tropical regions. So we forget in North America, where it's so dominated by cool weather grazing, that the vast majority of the planet is not like that. So it's been really good to be able to learn those things. And then I spent a year rebuilding the cattle program for Australia's largest carbon developer. That's what I've been doing over the last year. Sadly, we sold our place down here in Deep East Texas when my parents split up, and the danger of having investors who are also related to you, it creates some issues. So lessons learned there, and now I'm sort of focusing on the book and looking for the next opportunity to continue to hone my blade, if you will. So that's really it. I come from a strange convergence of traditional cowboy shit, I guess you would call it. That's what my people, my great grandfather came to the Panhandle of Texas to run the Ojo Bravo division of the XIT Ranch in 1888. So,
wow.
The horse has been the horse and absolute mastery of horse culture has been the center of my heritage for a long time. So I'm the first one to kind of break out into, okay, well, what's actually really going on here? And then luckily my dad is a Pacific Northwest naturalist, conservationist, big fan of John Muir and Thoreau. So I spent a lot of my life sort of subconsciously grappling with the the parts of those philosophies that did not necessarily jive with each other. And so once I started dipping my toes into regenerative agriculture and figured out that the herd mechanism is actually extremely, extremely important to the blueprint, the operating manual of Mother Nature, then that suddenly those internal inconsistencies were resolved, and suddenly ranching and conservation ceased to exist as concepts in my mind, and then they are replaced. They're transcended by, I guess, what you might just call eco-agriculture. So, one thing that's important to remember is that 20% of our efforts yield 80% of our outcome, and that's the herd activity is in that 20%. So it yields a huge disproportionate amount of the outcome in our planetary operations, and that's once I learned that, then boom. Hey, isn't this amazing? It's not just making steaks for people anymore. Now we have a sort of ecological, spiritual component of what we do, and so it becomes so much more than who can just spur a bronc the longest. So luckily, an entire new universe was opened up for me, and that's what's driven me with a sort of loud and obnoxious obsession ever since.
I love it. You mentioned that you were doing some work for a group out of Australia and specifically for their grazing management and aligned with some carbon. And much of the modern ranching, I think today, is under fire for its environmental impact one way or another. How does your approach differ from industrial cattle operations? How do you fit cattle into that, call it regenerative land management, in a way that is additive or more impactful?
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. One thing that let's step back and figure out what is actually the problem. This is actually super interesting. So in the mid 1900s, cattle used to fit beautifully into the ecological subset. Obviously, everybody knows that they come from the auroch, which the last one of those went extinct in the 1600s in a forest in Poland, and I'd like to meet the first guy who domesticated one of those things, for sure. And so everything was going along pretty hunky-dory, and there weren't that many people, and there was a lot of landscape, and so we could get away with having a non. I can already tell this is going to go, so I'm just preparing everybody for this. This is going to be a soliloquy here. So there was a lot of land, not a lot of people. We could get away with allowing cattle to kind of go out and do the thing, but also at the same time, they didn't have a whole lot of inputs to keep them going. So there was a really, really great subset of genetic cattle genetics that got them very, very. They grew a lot of fat, very fertile all over the world. Really great types of cattle. Then a very strange thing happened in the middle of the 20th century, which was we discovered that we could eat seed oils, and suddenly we had no need for tallow anymore. And right at the same time, people discovered that, we have all this land, all this fuel, all this monoculture agriculture. It's much more profitable to just put the cattle in the feedlots and just feed them the grain that we and the ration mix that we come up with. So we're gonna make more money. My family did a lot of that in the Texas Panhandle. So let's do that. And so suddenly they get these cattle in the feedlot, and these cattle with these beautiful grass-adapted genetics, all they do is put on a lot of unprofitable fat immediately, and they don't grow.
Yeah.
So they decided, we need to start selecting cattle for lean growth. And as it takes 3 to 5 times more energy to put on fat than it does to put on lean meat. So we started selecting the most fuel-efficient cattle for absolute growth, and now, after 50, 60, 70 years of that, we have these, and it's starting to move away from that to some degree, but in a large part of the world, it's still, we want the biggest, framiest cattle we can that are going to give us the most growth in the feedlot. And so one of the struggles that we're running into in the regenerative community is, people are thinking, regenerative agriculture, that's just shuffling cows around on the grass and moving them and making sure that we have these, adequate rest periods. And that's, part of the equation, but it's not the whole equation. And so your initial question is, how do we fit cattle into a regenerative frame? And so then the question we have to ask is, what is the blueprint of reality that the evolution of all beings set up for us? And that is massive amounts of herd density and long rest periods.
Right.
And I know that some people are going to try to dig into the nuance of that, and obviously there is nuance, but always keep in mind that people who want to dig into the nuance are the people who don't understand it that well, and the people who do understand it really well are the ones who are not afraid to make absolute claims. And so the best, I guess what you'd say, the really dumb people and the really smart people will make absolute claims. So that's what I'm going to say. So what we need is intense herd density and long rest periods. And what we're finding is that these cattle who are bred for feedlot performance, they cannot handle programs that cross the threshold into the amount of density that we need for true land renewal. And I'm talking, in a subtropical environment, you need 500, 600, 700,000 pounds per acre, maybe even up to 1 million pounds per acre. And in a more sort of a northern latitude, higher quality forage environment, you can get away with less than that, but you still need that intense density. I was on a ranch in Montana over this last weekend looking at it, and they may only have one plant, or say 10 plants per square yard, little bunch grass, but you still need that herd density to break the soil cap and get things going. So when it comes to fitting cattle into the regenerative narrative, we have to define what that is, and we have to recognize that it's, number one, teasing out those grass-adapted genetics, number one, and then deploying them in ways that crosses that behavioral threshold. And this is something I've been exploring for a long time, and only sort of being able to articulate recently. And one of the things that I saw in Montana is that they'll give maybe these cattle one break a day, and there is a lot of forage laying over, a lot of forage being wasted, a lot of forage trampling, and that is not how the historical herds acted. So what the real trick that most regenerative people are having a hard time getting to is crossing the threshold of what I'm calling searching costs. So these cattle, they continue to find that the benefits of walking around and searching for a better bite has a lower cost than staying and just eating what's there. So what we need to do is we need to increase the competition and increase the density until the searching cost is higher than the just stay there and fill yourself up cost. And when we do that, when we cross that density, that's what Johann Zietzman refers to as too much but not enough, or you can't sweeten a cup of tea with 1 grain of sugar, isn't one way that he'll put it. So when we learn how to cross that threshold, then we find that the cattle figure out pretty quick that the searching costs outweigh the benefit of just eating what's there. Then our harvest efficiency goes way up. We can move across our landscape more slowly. We can increase our stocking rates, and we can allow longer rest periods. But the problem is, even the people who do that, they're finding that the cattle don't have the genetics and the nutritional adaptation to do that, because the grass-adapted cattle have basically gone by the wayside. And in order to solve that, we have several of us, many of us, especially as you get into lower latitudes. The British cattle do fine in northern latitudes. The British cattle, you can improve them a little bit with a few lesser known breeds bringing into them, but it's really all about selection criteria. If you apply the selection criteria properly, then everything works out beautifully. But you get into the lower latitudes, and you really fall apart when you have these big framey cattle. I mean, when I was working with the Australians, they had sub 50% weaning rates in these tropical environments, because the cattle just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they keep selecting for these cattle that the feedlot want, and the fertility falls off the shelf. You have these cattle that are not cycling until they're 2 years old. You have cattle that are not having their first calf until they're 4, and they're only giving you a calf every 18 months. So So it's extremely inefficient, and that can be solved primarily by the infusion of African genetics as well as proper selection criteria. And this is actually one of getting to selection. I can actually stop there if you have any additional follow-up questions. But
no,
selections.
I love it. I do want you to touch on, because when I first came across you, it was actually with a TikTok fire and salt post that you were talking about your I want to say Monashi breed. I might have that wrong, but there was Mashona. Thank you. That obviously indicates I need a little more coffee before this conversation, but Mashona. And I'd love for you to talk about that, because it was such a fascinating video. And I had sent it to a ton of different cattlemen and just was talking about breed selection and, how we have to really account for that in the different bioregions. So I think you're on a thread that I wanted to touch on anyway, and I would just love for you to make sure you touch on that.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. So I think the easiest way to talk about the Mashona is to juxtapose them with another hot weather breed, for instance, the Brahman cattle. As people know, that the Brahman cattle it's an American creation of basically 4 Indian subcontinent creation, and I can't remember. It's the Gir, the Gujarat, and there are a couple of others that I don't remember. But it's an interesting breed, and there was a lot of potential if they had selected differently in the beginning. But there was one inherent problem with the Brahmin that goes back a long time, and that's that they were treated as divine beings for the entirety of their of their history in the Indian subcontinent. So what that means is they got to do whatever they want, they got to go wherever they wanted, they got to eat whatever they want, so they had no selection pressure on them whatsoever. Right. And so you had they have notoriously bad temperaments. They could afford to go until they were 2 years old to cycle, or 4 and to have the first calf, because nobody cared, nobody did anything. They served no ecological utility. Whereas in, for instance, let's talk about the Mashona. There are a lot of really great breeds in Africa. The Mashona is one. The Nguni, which is very, very closely related. Mashona you can really think of as kind of a polled Nguni. It's a solid color polled Nguni. The Ngoni, which you can find a lot in Zambia, which is a very small breed, but probably the toughest and one of the most fertile breeds on the planet. So these breeds, and we'll focus specifically on the Mashona, and I have to say it like that because I've been corrected by people from Zimbabwe. It's not Mashona, it's Mashona. So they were selected and kept by the Shona tribe in northern Zimbabwe, and for hundreds of years they had to endure the number one problem, which is if you get away in Africa, you get eaten by a lion. So every night these cattle had to be put into a corral, and every day they had to be walked out to grazing. So number one, if you have an asshole individual who jumps out of the corral, it gets eaten by a lion, because there's nothing a lion loves more than a bovine, that's for sure. And the other issue is that if you go through a period of drought, then maybe you have to walk 4 hours to get to grazing. You only have 4 hours to graze, and then you have to walk 4 hours back to the corral. And so all your cattle don't get eaten. And so you go through those periods of aggravated selection, and what happens during those periods? Only the most nutritionally adapted, most fertile cattle are the ones who replicate. So you have this massive selection pressure, or what some people call aggravated selection, through those periods, and you end up with these extremely adapted animals. And so those genetics, and then that everything was well and great until the 60s and 70s, until and the governments in Africa started bringing in these improved European breeds, and they just fell apart. The fly adaptation, the tick adaptation, the disease adaptation, the heat adaptation was just nothing. And in our extreme wisdom, we thought that we could improve upon 1,000 years of natural selection in the African ecology. So the way forward for transforming our extremely unadapted herds to very adapted herds are the selection criteria, which we can get into in a little bit, and with either a small or large infusion of unimproved African genetics, depending on your bioregion. So the Mashona, the second that I got to Texas, I immediately bought Mashona bulls from a couple of great people in Florida, and were using Corriente cattle, which were particularly adapted Spanish cattle that ran around loose for 300 years in Texas. So Texas and Mexico, and there were some in there, the Georgia brushies, the Florida cracker cattle, the piney woods cattle, all basically the same Spanish cattle that had gotten loose and were running around. So all very, very highly adapted. And so, but obviously people who know the Corriente cattle, they're not particularly beefy, so the Mashona cattle, we brought those in to try to fix that, and we're having a lot of great progress when we had to sell the ranch, so which was sad, but that's just the way it goes. And so I've seen firsthand in multiple environments how infusion of African genetics and a proper selection criteria can just improve the quality of your genetics really fast.
That's amazing. And so all of this knowledge and information, what was the precipice to pen the book, Herd, and share some of this information? What was that moment to you that was like?
What was the precipice of it? What made me write it?
Yeah.
Oh well, I think one of the great sadnesses, I think, of AI is that we're going to get away from this very, very misunderstood concept that if you haven't written about it, you don't know what you think about it. I think the vast majority of regenerative practitioners have learned stuff from other people, and that's great. We all do that, and it's super necessary. But until you write about it yourself, you don't force yourself to grapple with the concepts deeply enough to really understand it, and to take your own personal tack on it. When I wrote this book, I did not care about trying to teach people how to graze. That was not. Well, back up a little bit. So the point of me writing the book was to figure out what I thought about the whole damn thing. Because we're not all just ranchers. We're ranchers plus the things we're interested in, the other things that we love, the other peculiar little hobbies. I'm a big fan of Jungian psychology. I'm a big fan of John Muir style conservation. I'm a big fan of Zen Buddhism and religion in general. So I have this very strange take on things, and I wanted to find a way to marry all of the various things that I love and create some sort of uniting guide for how I view the world. And that's really what it came to. And so I wanted to figure out, and I started first and foremost to go, well, what the hell is really going on here? It's like, okay, it's enough to say, well, moving cows, that's great. Clearly it works. But are we trying to just create another agriculture where we're figuring out cheat codes for the world? Or are we trying to figure out how to harmonize with the very fabric of reality? How are we trying to align our activities with the blueprint of existence? And so in order to do that, I had to examine my own mind all the way down to the fundamental elements of my own thinking. And ultimately, you have to take it down to what is the most fundamental belief that anybody can have? Because ultimately, we're all dealing with beliefs. And so I went all the way down to the deepest belief that I could come up with, which is the world exists. Okay, great. Now, let's start with the world exists, and let's build on top of that, because if every step that you put on top of another one is an accurate mental model of reality, then that gives you a strong foundation and a strong structure. And it's my conception that industrial agriculture is built on an extremely weak is an extremely weak structure. It seems to be strong because we have an endless supply of fossil fuels, effectively. For all intents and purposes, for people that live 80 years, it's endless. And over an 80-year lifetime, we don't really see that much ecological degradation, and we don't see our systems depleting all that much. Although many other civilizations through time have certainly lived through systems collapsing very quickly. And I'm not a doomsdayer or anything about that, but all I'm saying is that I think that if you align yourself with if you harmonize your activities with the fabric of reality, you will create more yield and you'll make more money. So we have an economy that's fundamentally that is fundamentally misaligned with the ecology on our planet, and so that's one of the things I'm trying to figure out. How are we going to do that? And if you're going to do that, you have to start with the world exists and go all the way up to grazing management. And so that's one of the things I wrote about in the book. I also wrote about in the book how effectively the two systems are different. You have a system built on compulsion, which is the industrial model, and then you have a system that is built on voluntary agreement. And that's the ecological model. It's basically, and if you have a compulsory model, it's by definition more inefficient because you have a certain amount of energy that's being siphoned away to enforce what's happening. And voluntary models have, and I have citations for this from people who are much smarter than I am about how information flows across voluntary models are much more effective, and there are many more of them. And that goes right to the heart of your work on decentralization, certainly, right there. So, totally. That goes to show you right there that it's a mental model in line with a better functioning and harmonious reality when you have those decentralized models. So, regenerative voluntary models are inherently more decentral in not only the way that humans interact with them, but the way that they are applied on the ground, the way that they manifest on the ground. So the book was an effort to do that. It was an effort to go all the way back to the savannah. What really was going on there. It's and I as best I can tell, human beings were living in trees, and then massive herds created a really beautiful playing field for us to just hang out on when they would pass through, and suddenly we wouldn't have to worry about a lion eating us for a second because there was no grass for it to hide in, and that's a very, very crude overview of it, but that over many millennia. You get culture, you get games, you get a human nervous system that is tuned to mowed lawns and golf courses and amphitheaters with a severely grazed grass. So like you never see anybody go to a music festival with tall grass. That's just not something that happens, and that all in my view goes back to the savannah and herds coming through and taking all the forage and. So it's really a book about, and ultimately at the end of the day, then you stop worrying about survival, which is your lowest priority, and then suddenly your nervous system begins to bloom and blossom, and then you find God, and then so thanks to the herd animals, we were able to develop our nervous system to the point where people can have massive spiritual awakenings, and so I attribute the ability to commune with God as a direct derivative of the activity of herd animals, which is going to seem pretty wonky to a lot of people, but I'm right, so I don't care. But yeah, so it's so the reason that I wrote that book is for me to be able to really compartmentalize and be able to formulate that thought and those ideas as effectively as possible, and say, okay, how do I really feel about this? What do I really think about it? and it's been great. I've gotten great reception so far, and I've gotten some, as I thought I would, because I'm kind of weird like that. A lot of the more traditional people who have read it, their eyes kind of go like, "Whoa, what the hell's going on?" It's not, it does. You don't really start a book on ranching with a perceived psychotic break, which actually turns out to be a spontaneous awakening experience, which I won't dwell on that, but it was sort of an important point in my life that tore down everything before it and allowed a sort of a fresh slate for a new life. And so that's the beginning of it, and definitely
I love it.
Set the stage.
And I'm really grateful that you wrote the book. I've read it once, and I'm getting back into the second reading of it. And I was asked by somebody, and they said, "Well, why are you rereading it?" I said, "Because there's a lot in here that you have to sit and wrestle with a little bit. That conventional brain, that the way that we've been educated or schooled in agriculture. And I've grown up in agriculture, and being in ranching, and I wrestle myself on a regular basis daily, with this agroecology mindset versus this conventional, we must have a profitable outcome. And the lines continue to be blurred. And I think you've challenged me quite a bit in the book in thinking about a lot about the ancestral component that I don't often think about, and maybe that might lead into a question of mine, which is, in your perspective, that ancestral pastoral wisdom in modern ranching today, do you think it deserves more recognition? I guess maybe is a simple question to build off of.
I think that's probably the reason that the African graziers are so much further ahead than everybody else, because they're in an environment where they can look around and they can see what big herds are actually doing, and nowhere else on the planet is that present still. Africa is the only place where there's a semi-optimized system, and it's decreasing every year. You see pictures of the elephant herds in the 50s, and you'd be like, how can anybody think that there would be any forage left over at all after a herd of those elephants went through anything? The absolute devastation when these herds would go through, and so that's why the Africans, particularly Zeetzman, Alan Savory, they're able to look around and go, oh, okay, well, this makes sense. You have to have that kind of environment to trigger that sort of knowledge. And Savory, Zeetzman, there's another writer, a guy actually who an American who lives in Kenya now. You may have heard of him, called Nate Chisholm. He wrote a book called Savannah. Really, really great book. I was talking to him the other day, and he was a great inspiration for me. There are some things that he and I disagree on, but largely in the ancestral component, I think he's got it pretty right. And so he definitely helped send me down that path. But trying to find a way to unify all of those guys was sort of my primary component. But I think, absolutely, it's the job of us who care enough to try to, and I guess that's partly why I wrote the book, because why would anybody who was born in late 20th century, early 21st century North America care at all, or have anything to grab onto just by looking around to make them realize the interconnectedness, the interbeing of herds and humans? Like that wouldn't occur to most anybody at all. And so luckily, through the work of some really great people, primarily out of Africa, that's becoming very clear. So
amazing.
It's great. So to answer your question in short, yes, we do need, if we can understand how we fit into the whole. This is why I keep using the phrase the blueprint of reality. The blueprint of Mother Nature, the fabric of reality. If we can find where we fit in that, because we just think we just in a way, subconsciously, we just think that we're just like parasites that come down and just walk around and watch Netflix and eat stuff and try to survive and not die. And like, why do we have all these? Why do we have this big brain and stuff? And maybe the Anunnaki came down and genetically engineered us, maybe. But there's definitely a lot of evidence that that herd animals created a beautiful environment for us to evolve. And so there is a deep, long story of that relation that we have, and that relationship that we have. I write in the book about the buffalo dance, which I think is extremely important. And part of the story is that, and I'll let the readers go look at it. It's basically a young Sioux princess. I think it's this. I'm pretty sure it's the Lakota Sioux. It's my book, I should remember. But she has to end up marrying this buffalo, and then her father objects, and then the buffalo stomps her father to death, and she's sad. And the buffalo says, "If you can bring him back to life, then I'll let you go." And she does, and she brings him back to life with this dance and this song. And the buffalo said, "Oh, well, if you can bring him back to life, can't you just bring us back to life every year?" And the idea is that it's the activity of those two animals, those two groups, the humans and the buffalo, that bring each other back into being every year. And they go beyond the veil. And another thing I realized after writing the book is that the marriage between the young girl and the buffalo, when it was dissolved, it ensured the marriage between the humans and the buffalo proper, the people. So it became this transcendent marriage between the two groups. And so when people begin to understand the inkling of this, it's not just these are our resources and we use them to create an outcome. No, it's this beautiful dance of reality that we're all participating in. And that maybe goes back to your earlier question, which is about how do we transition from the industrial model to the regenerative model, which is it's just how we view the world. If we view the world as just a bunch of atoms bumping up against each other and objects and resources to be used and managed and maintained and material to be manipulated, then of course we are going to go down the path that we're going now. And that's sadly the only way out of that is to understand, have a deep understanding and knowingness of the complete, I guess you would call, interbeing or oneness of all reality, and how it all springs from the invisible source. Whether you want to call that God or the Godhead or Brahman or whatever. Pick your poison. Once you start seeing the world like that, and then there is no other, there's no subject and object, and you have that understanding, then you can go play the game. But the game is completely flipped, and the game is completely changed once you do that, and then it's hard to work on Wall Street, I guess.
Yeah. That's that herd human symbiosis that you're talking about, and the cascading up and down. Maybe I'll change topic a little bit, and I'll come back, and only that I was just at a conference around carbon accounting, which really a little bit did my head in, because we continue to talk about things that aren't working. But I'd love to get your take. I mean, you talked about that, and I'm only pulling on the thread because right at the start of our conversation, you mentioned you're in Australia, and you're designing something towards the end state being part of this carbon market space. But just on from your perspective, I'd love your insight or your thoughts around this funny market space that we've called the carbon market space.
Yeah, it's very very interesting. Australia has the world's only regulated carbon market, and at the end of the day, regulated means they take something from somebody and give it to somebody else, which is however much of that is appropriate in government is an always ongoing discussion.
Right.
And there are a lot of amazing opportunities, and there are I think there are a lot of Well, hell with it. I'm just not going to be that political about it. I think right now it's kind of mostly a way for the bean counters to get involved without actually going out and moving any cows. Effectively, what we're finding is now the beef traders, the beef futures traders who control the market here and have largely controlled the market a lot in other places. Now it's moving to the energy traders. So the energy traders who make a lot of money on trading carbon credits and moving it all around, they're the ones calling the shots now. It was a beautiful opportunity to make things happen in Australia, and I designed I think a really, really beautiful business plan for them, and how much of it they'll actually use, we'll have to see. I think I'm such a idealist and a visionary person that even when I try to incorporate the reality of the markets, I'm always going to push people a bit further than they're comfortable with, and even when you have leadership that's really comfortable with that, you're going to have people on the ground in operations that think you're absolutely out of your gourd, and certainly that's something that we. And people who don't understand things, they're gonna turn things around, and that's definitely a difficult element. And so ultimately, even as the carbon market grows, it is still going to be at the mercy of individual humans, as all markets are.
Right.
So I would say that what I used to view as the importance of carbon, now I transition to the importance of harmony. Because if you can build harmony, you will build more of everything. You will get more because you have a completely voluntary, decentralized system that just produces more.
Right.
That's ostensibly the value of the free market. And I think that. I was more on the cattle side than the actual carbon side,
Right.
but I will say that it creates some very interesting conflicts. For instance, it took me a while to realize that the fundamental problem that they are dealing with in tropical Australia is that they were being awarded carbon credits to not burn the tropical north. So
Right.
in most, historically, the tropical north of Australia, a lot of it burns. A huge amount of it burns. They have basically a 4 to 6 month wet season, then it dries off completely for 4 to 6 months, no moisture. And
Right.
so you get those late season, really dry burns where the grass is really tall, boof, everything goes up. So the goal is to implement early dry season cool burns to minimize that. Now, that's been happening forever, and all the cattle up there are adapted to this fresh green regrowth once everything burns. And so now the carbon element of the business is incentivized to not burn, and that means the cattle don't have as much green grass to eat. So my job was to come in and to solve that problem, which is putting in selection criteria for early maturing fertile cattle, using African genetics to improve it, and then building the production chain in such a way that they're not punished for not producing feedlot cattle. So
Right.
so it was a pretty large integrated plan. But I don't know how much it's going to actually affect the bottom line for ranchers that much. And but I find that one of the things I write about in the book is we're all sort of notoriously blind to our own motivations. Thus the importance of examining things deeply and then building ourselves some guardrails so that we can't justify our way out of things. And it's going to be like anything else. It's going to be another industry where people are going to try to get rich off of it, and ultimately it's still viewing the world as material interacting with material, and we whoever can manipulate that material or be closest to the resources or closest to the money printer is going to make more money than everybody else, and probably the saints will still get crucified. So So you know, I just think it's all just a fun game. You know, it's you know, that's the thing that I wrote about a lot. I think in the end of the book is that, you know, you got to get real comfortable with your own death, and once you start to get real comfortable with your own death, then it's all just a game, and who gives a shit? And try to eliminate as much suffering as you can for your fellow beings while you're on the planet, and then and exhaust yourself in the service of the harmony of all existence, and then you know go quietly or loudly into the grave. You know, so that's so it, you know, I've become quite a lot more comfortable with that as I've gotten older, and it's allowed me to see that, you know, I just don't take it so seriously anymore. If I get to participate and have a great time and do some good while I'm here, that's great. And it's all just a dance. It's all just a movie, really. There's I had an acquaintance when I was living in Central Oregon who was a guy named Leonard Gross, and I think he was in his 90s, and he had been the editor of a magazine called Look magazine from back in the day. I believe he was like the Paris station chief or something like that. And as he was on, it was relayed to me that as he was on his deathbed, the last thing he said right before he expired was, he goes, "It's all a movie." And that's exactly right, as far as I can tell. It's just a movie, and it's just all God springing into existence to play with itself. So when it comes to the carbon market or the stock market or whatever, it's all just a game, and if it serves to bring harmony into the world, then that's great. I'll support it. And if it doesn't, then, you know, it's just another thing in a long line of things that don't bring harmony. But it's all just a game.
Yeah, I actually really love that. I'm going to ask you just one more question here, and then I want to give you a platform just to share a little bit what's going on in your bioregion as we start to get towards the end of this podcast.
Sure.
But from your perspective, do you think there's a future for small-scale multi-species herding in a world that's fully dominated by monocultural everything?
Like a FLIRD?
Yeah, FLIRD.
Or multi-species herding? I don't have any experience with it.
Okay.
I hesitate to say because I don't have any experience with it, and it has been my experience that increasing complexity often creates a lot of roadblocks for people, and this could be wrong once again because I don't have much experience with it. It's difficult to get sometimes the amount of density that you need to really push the ecosystem forward with multiple species, because in a natural setting you have multi-species grazing, but the herds are so massive that by the time, you know, the wildebeest and the zebra work together, but by the time both of those herds, and they're intermingled, but by the time both of those herds go across, it's just absolute devastation. And to be able to recreate that on a smaller scale, you know, if you put a bunch of sheep in with the cattle and you're at really high densities, the cattle will kick the sheep out. So there may be some practical issues. I think that the most effective way that I've found, and obviously once again my experience is limited, is just have extremely adapted cattle, or sheep. Sheep is great too. Just do one thing really well, but I don't claim to have all the answers, and I certainly don't have any experience with that. So I'm going to shut up before I dig myself a deeper hole.
I love it, though. Do one thing really well. We'll leave on that point. Well, Hobbs, as I had imagined, this is a terrific conversation. And as I always do towards the end of the podcast, I love to give you the platform to share anything that's happening in your bioregion, where people could go find your book, anything you'd love to share with the audience for them to think about or takeaways. Stage is yours. Oh,
sure. Okay. Well, I guess sort of the you can find the book on Amazon. It's called Herd. The link will be in here. You can also find me LinkedIn, TikTok, Instagram. I don't really TikTok or Instagram that much anymore, primarily because I don't have a herd to stand in front of, or I don't have any grass to really point at the moment. Any investors who want to buy a bunch of land and put in the extremely optimized system, you are certainly welcome to reach out to me, Instagram or TikTok. So the one thing that I would say if I just wanted to talk about anything, I would say that the fundamental difference between the way I look at things and the way that, say, even the giants whose heads I stand upon, is that cattle exist. I'll say this. A lot of people will say cattle exist for two reasons, and then this is in the book, and I know you've heard this before and you've read it, but I'll for your
Great.
audience here. A lot of people will say that cattle exist for two reasons: to eat grass, maintain ecosystems, improve the ecology, and also to provide food or to provide protein. Mm-hmm. And that's even what my great mentor Johann Zietzmann says. But I think he's wrong. I think that cattle exist for one reason alone, and that is to eat grass. Herds exist to maintain and improve ecosystem processes. That's every single animal, every single living being on this planet is food to another being once it dies. So why in the world would we manage it from that perspective? Why would we build a management paradigm on what cattle share with every other single being? It only makes sense to build a management paradigm from their ability to maintain and improve ecosystem processes. Now, people will hear me say that and they'll go, "Oh, so we can't eat beef?" And that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is the only way to improve the distance on your golf shot is to improve your form, not try to hit it harder. Okay? So the idea is that if we start to select all of our cattle and start to filter all of our management processes through ecosystem harmony, then we will have more beef, we will have fattier, amazing, better grass-fed beef than ever before. We have this view that cattle are these industrial resources. And let me tell you something. The second that you start thinking about, if you're looking at a cow and you're thinking about a beef product, when you're looking at that cow standing on the pasture, that cow is already dead to you in your mind.
Right.
And how can you manage something that is already dead to you in your mind?
Yeah, that leaves me reason to pause there. That's a good thought.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
So we don't realize how our preconceptions influence our management. So until we really start to examine it deeply, and then we have to ask ourselves, what is the key? What is the key to turning to make these cattle harmonious in the ecology? And it's two gears that work together. Number one is fertility. Fertility is the convergence point of all meaningful things. The ecology depends on fertility to continue. The ecology does not depend on the percentage of ribeye marbling as determined by an ultrasound to continue. That is completely, totally irrelevant bullshit thing to think about, and has no bearing onto the greater system of existence, and is just a trophy for man's ego. And so fertility is the convergence point. If you select cattle for fertility, you will get easier keeping cattle. You will get cattle that are going to give you more calves, that are going to be able to perform their job in the ecosystem better. You want cattle that are able to have their first calf at 2 years old and then calve again at 3, and then there's a whole selection criteria. Johann Zietzmann has the best selection program out there. Man, Cattle, and Veld is the best book on that. I highly recommend it. Hope maybe you can put a link up to that book as well.
I will.
Just absolutely fantastic. And fertility is one of those gears. The other gear is ultra-high density grazing, and high fertility adapted animals are the very mechanism that makes ultra-high density grazing work. A lot of people, including myself, have jumped into ultra-high density grazing with unadapted animals, and you find that it doesn't work. So you have to start to select for your adapted animals, and then you have to slowly start to build towards ultra-high density grazing so that you can give the land what it has been crying out for thousands and thousands of years. Another thing that I would like to bring to people's attention is that I'm a big proponent. One of the things that really kicked off my understanding of this whole thing was I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but the Younger Dryas impact, the Younger Dryas impact theory. So the idea is, 12,800 years ago, suddenly the entire planet dropped 10 degrees Celsius overnight. Now, what the hell happened? And we're coming to understand the evidence is increasing all the time that a comet, shards of a comet, broke off, and over a period of, we went through a very chunky section of an orbit that goes through a broken up comet, and 12,800 years ago we went through a particularly chunky section, and it hit, many of these hit the polar ice cap. And you had a flash melting of the polar ice caps. It dumped into the Atlantic current, shut down the Atlantic current, and then you had basically an entire atmosphere that was full of stuff. There's evidence that shows a third of the Earth's biomass burned in that period.
Wow.
This is confirmed with nanodiamonds. It's been a while since iridium. All kinds of other what's the other one? Extraterrestrial. I can't remember the exact element, but there's a lot of geologic evidence that shows this, including the black mat, which is another thing you should look into. So when I realized this, I'm like, okay, massive extinction event paired with the Younger Dryas impact, and then so for 12,800 years, we basically had. And by the way, the area that was affected the least amount for this was Africa. And the one place that we basically have mega herbivores left is Africa. So I started getting into this. Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock have a great Joe Rogan on this, by the way. You should check out.
Okay.
And I started getting into this, and I went, oh, well, that's why our ecologies have been so screwed up for a long time. Then reading Nate Chisholm's book and understanding that, oh my gosh, well, the whole world used to be savanna. And so I started looking into that for myself and finding my own sources for that. And it's like, oh, he was right. Everywhere from Southeast Asia to North America to anywhere you want to look, you're finding that the whole world was basically a mosaic golf course kept open and beautiful by these big herds of animals. Now the herds of animals are gone. What are the humans going to do? Because the ecology is toast, and we don't have as much food to chase, and so we invent agriculture, so that we don't die. So that was another thing. So that I would say that looking into fertility, that's big. Check into that. Read Johann Zietsman's book. Check out the Younger Dryas impact event. And these are all little puzzle pieces that start to unfold the entire context of who we are as beings on this planet and what our job really should be.
I love it. Yeah.
So that's my spiel, and I'm very grateful that you were able to have me on today, and we're finally able to get hooked up, Neil.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much, Hobbs. For everyone listening, you've got your marching orders of what to look into, what to start reading and diving into. For those of you in the Grow community, I'll be testing you on your knowledge in coming weeks here. So get prepared and start reading up. But in all seriousness, if you want to reach out to Hobbs, as he's mentioned, he's got a few social platforms, or for anyone attached to Grow here, reach out to me and I'll put you in touch. A lot of great conversation pieces, and leaves us with some reason to think and sit back and pause for a moment. So thank you so much, Hobbs. Really appreciate this. We'll catch you on the next
Neil.
Pasture Prime Time. Have a great day.
Same thing. Bye.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Grow Renaissance podcast. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe this episode. Remember, it will take a community of us to do the best in the world and truly nourish not only ourselves, but the planet, the atmosphere, the soil, the plants, and the animals on it. So make sure you spread this message anywhere that you can.